This is Rick Levine with the February astrology forecast, February 2020. And as always, it's an interesting month, but boy, it sure doesn't have the punch that the last few months have had. We'll get into that in a little bit. There's some stress in the month ahead. There's some smooth sailing. There's some revisiting the past. We're not quite done. For all of you who think, for all of you who have been following the astrology of these times and have been following the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, you know that we are now through the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, but that doesn't mean for one moment that we're done with it. But before we jump into the material, I have some dates coming up that I want to share with you. For those people who are bored with this part, you can fast forward through it. You can jump to the material ahead. But I know many of you want to know what I'm doing and where I'm going to be and where you can catch up with me. And I do have a busy year ahead, but I'm going to go through these rather quickly. I will put links up on the internet so that you can follow the links for more information. On April 16th and 18th, that weekend, ROMA, the Rocky Mountain Astrology Association, will be sponsoring me in Boulder, Colorado. And I'll be doing on the 16th of April a talk called Consciousness Con Carne, which is consciousness with meat. And this will be a fresh look at reincarnation. And then on April 18th, I'll be doing a workshop on Saturday, the Astrology of Relationships, Theory and Practice. In May, on May 5th through the 12th, I'll be joining Kai Pacha, Maurice Fernandez, Julia Simas, Ari Moshe, Timothy Halloran, Nadia Shaw, Sol Janasin, Christina Cadil, Timothy Halloran, and we will be down at the Margaritaville Resort on the Pacific Ocean in Costa Rica. This is Astrology Rising 2020. The first Astrology Rising 3 years ago was absolutely magnificent and fun and exciting. And this will be a mixture of lectures and outside stuff and at the beach and full moon rituals and dancing and yoga, and find out more and join us. It's going to be an amazing event. Then May 21st through the 25th, Memorial Day weekend, is the annual Seattle NORWAC. Although I am not on the speakers list, I certainly will be there. NORWAC is my home team community, home playing field. And as many of you know, I've spoken at many, many NORWACs over the last 30 years. And this is one where I just get to go and enjoy myself and enjoy you guys and the amazing speakers who are there. More information on NORWAC is below. And I would suggest that if you're interested in this, that you register soon, because last year the conference sold out. There were no availabilities. Even if you wanted to go, you couldn't. So get your registration for NORWAC in early, and I will see you there, May 21st to the 25th. Then on a couple of weeks after that, June 5th through the 7th, I'll be teaching up in Toronto. I'll be doing a whole weekend of work for the Toronto group. Friday night, I'll be doing a talk on reincarnation and disincarnation. Saturday will be how to improve your chart readings, and Sunday will be relationships and the synthesis of charts. And so this will be a real hands-on weekend, June 5th through the 7th for in Toronto. Then July 26th through the 30th, I'll be doing my summer event at Brighton Bush Hot Springs. This also pretty much always sells out. And if you're interested, go to the Brighton Bush, brightonbush.com, brightonbush.com. That's B-R-E-I-T-E-N, Bush, B-U-S-H. And this is an amazing place. Those of you who have been following me here, and I've talked about this for years, it's an off-the-grid place, hot springs, 3 full vegetarian meals a day, lots of astrology. We got 5 nights there. It starts on a Sunday evening and goes through Friday. Looking forward to seeing you there. That's July 26th to the 31st. Then just a couple weeks later, August 7th through the 9th in Rhinebeck, New York, at the Omega Institute. I'll be joining Maurice Fernandez, Kay Taylor, Catherine Andron, Ann Ortley, and Gemini Brett. And we will be talking about astrology, consciousness, and the great shift. And it will be an overview, but some in-depth work, whether you're an absolute beginner or a serious student or even a professional. This is going to be an amazing weekend. Omega Institute's an amazing place, and we are looking forward to that. Then September 10th through the 14th, ISAR, that's the International Society for Astrological Research, will be holding its conference, Reimagining the Future. This will be focusing on the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction of December 17th, which is kind of a final statement from the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that happened back in January. And this will be an amazing conference also. Probably, it will be the largest of the conferences through 2020. I will be speaking there, and I will also be doing a post-conference workshop information on the ISAR 2020 conference site. Oh, and one other thing, and that is, although we haven't set the dates yet, it'll either be the end of November or in early December. I will be back in Bali with the Initiation to Astrology program, and more information will appear here. But, you know, Bali just keeps getting better and better and better. And if you're interested, it's not too early to start thinking about it, because that too typically fills up. So if you're interested in Bali, let me know, and I can put you on the list so that when we set the dates, which will probably be in the next few weeks, you will be informed. Now, with no further ado, let's jump back into the astrology for this month. And what we have for this month is an interesting array of events. And I'm going to start by bringing up the chart for February 1st, and we'll dig into the astrology of the month ahead. Just as an aside, the monthly astrology forecasts that I do, as you know, are free. They're available. They're always free. But if you want to support them, you can by going to patreon.com. That's Patreon, patreon.com/Rick Levine. And you can support my work both on these free monthly videos, or if you want to subscribe to additional videos, I do a mid-month update. I do occasional cosmic quickies that are on a variety of topics. Many of you saw the video I did on Ram Dass. If you haven't, the link is right there. I made that one available to everyone. And I also do a monthly online class of how to interpret charts. And I have openings now in my apprentice program. If you're interested in finding out more about any of these, go to patreon.com/Rick Levine and find out more. All right, so here we are with the chart for February 1st. We start the month obviously with the Sun in Aquarius, because this is the month of Aquarius. February is a short month, but we get the transition from Aquarius into Pisces. We also have a couple of other significant planetary transitions during this month. We have Venus moving into Aries on February 7th. Venus's movement into Aries kind of gets our juices going. Venus is not particularly thrilled about being in Aries, especially after being in Pisces, where she was so happy, where compassion and intuition and just yummy loveliness is just rampant with Venus in Pisces. Venus in Aries is a little more direct, a little more forceful. In the spirit of full astrological disclosure, I should say that I'm a proud owner of Venus in Aquarius, Venus in Aries. But Venus in Aries is more immediate. It's more urgent. It's about the here and now. And Venus moves into Aquarius on February 7th. Then we have Mars in Sagittarius through the middle of the month. And on February 16th, Mars moves from Sagittarius into Capricorn. Now, Mars didn't do so badly in Sagittarius because Mars is fiery and Sagittarius is fiery, and Mars gets to think about the long haul, the distance, about visioning far away. But Mars in Sagittarius lacks one important thing that it gains when it moves into Capricorn on February 16th. And that is that Mars gains staying power. Mars gains endurance. In astrology, as many of you know, every planet relates to a sign and every sign relates to a planet. But planets are also, aside from the sign that they're at home in, Mars is at home in Aries, every planet is exalted in a sign. And that means that it's like a guest in someone else's home. And Mars loves being in Capricorn. Mars is exalted in Capricorn because Mars finishes what it starts. And we can look at Mars in Capricorn finishing perhaps some of the things that have been started years ago. Maybe some of this is related to the political scenario. Maybe it's related to job changes or personal changes in your own life. But the fact of the matter is that Mars, once it moves into Capricorn, Mars will, not until March, we'll talk about this in March, Mars will actually run through Capricorn and conjunct Jupiter and Pluto and Saturn. But we get the first wave of Mars in Capricorn with this kind of steadiness now of moving ahead. We now have the energy to finish what it is that we started, and that ingress or transition is on February 16th. The other thing that happens this month is that planets that are in Aquarius, the Sun and Mercury, both move into Pisces. Mercury moves into Pisces on February 3rd. In fact, we'll have a Mercury story here in just a moment because Mercury does turn retrograde, moves into Pisces, turns retrograde, moves back into Aquarius just for a few days, back into Pisces once it turns direct. And we'll get there in just a moment. But Mercury moves into Pisces on February 3rd, and then the Sun moves from Aquarius into Pisces on February 18th. Now, the transition from Capricorn to Aquarius was when the Sun did that last month in January. Capricorn is the hard work and the steadiness and the endurance and the stability and the dealing with hardships. And when the Sun and Mercury moved into Aquarius, we get the bright idea that spring is nearby, but it's not really. It's the days begin to get longer in the Northern Hemisphere, and there's this kind of reaching out into the distance again. But when Mercury moves into Pisces, followed by the Sun, we now kind of settle into a more emotional stance that gets us ready for spring. And interestingly enough, because Venus moves into Aries on February 7th, we're kind of almost ahead of ourselves. Venus is already liking the idea of the energy of spring. Venus is already liking the buzz of the spring fever. And of course, we won't really get there until the spring equinox in the Northern Hemisphere, the vernal equinox, the autumnal in the Southern Hemisphere. But we will get there on the equinox toward the end of March. But right now, we're just getting inklings of what's ahead. But what's important is that Mercury and Venus are both ahead of the Sun. And so it's like we have antennae out that are experiencing things kind of reaching up front rather than when they're behind the star or behind the Sun, which is a star. So these things all happen during February, and once Mercury moves into Pisces, we communicate in a way that's more dreamy and poetic. But oddly enough, Venus will be in Aries during this time, which makes our attractions and our desires much harder, much more spontaneous, much more immediate. And yet when we try to communicate about them, or when we try to move through those spaces, it may not be as clear as we think it could be or should be. So let's come back to the chart at the beginning of the month, and we can see here that Mercury is at 27 degrees of Gemini. Let's move this ahead 12 hours at a time. And right there on February 3rd, we have our first significant transition of the month, and that is that Mercury moves into Pisces. If we back that up just a half a day, by the way, before Mercury leaves Aquarius, Mercury makes a half square with Jupiter. This is on the 2nd. We may have a bit of overindulgence. We may talk a big game. We may say things out farther than we can prove them. In other words, this is about the possibility of exaggeration. And even backing this up another day to February 1st, we don't want to lose the sight that on February 1st, Venus makes a sextile with Pluto, and then Venus will make a sextile with Saturn on February 3rd. Venus here moving from 22 Pisces to 25 Pisces, making first the sextile to Pluto at 23 Capricorn, then the sextile to Saturn. And this little scenario of making aspects first to Pluto and then to Saturn, now that Saturn's on the other side of Pluto, really changes something. Because up till now, for the last year, planets have been aspecting Saturn. We've been taking it hard. We've been being serious. Then they've been hitting Pluto, and we've been kind of going through a deeper transformation. It's now almost the opposite, where we go through the deep transformation. Venus hits the sextile with Pluto on February 1st, but then on February 3rd, when Venus makes the sextile to Saturn, then we actually we turn that into something solid and something lasting. Another thing that happens, though, on this date, which is also important, is that when Venus, just before Venus changes signs, Venus enters the shadow. Now, the shadow is the place where Mercury, the shadow of Mercury moves into Pisces. It turns retrograde in mid-Pisces, 12 degrees of Pisces on February 16th, and then it backs all the way up into Aquarius. It backs into Aquarius again on March 15th, not until March 15th. So Mercury enters the shadow on February 2nd, and it enters Pisces on February 3rd. Watching this Mercury alone, Mercury moves forward until February 16th. And there, Mercury on the 16th, Mercury stations and then turns retrograde at 12 degrees of Pisces. And then Mercury retrogrades all the way back, not until March. It retrogrades all the way back into Aquarius. And then it turns direct again. We'll get this further in March. But the point is that this period of time when Mercury is going back through the area that it once was, and then it'll turn direct, and it doesn't leave its shadow. It doesn't move past 12 degrees of Pisces until the end of March, until March 29th. Now let's bring this back to the beginning of February. And I want to talk a little bit about this because when Mercury is going through its shadow, the things that occur are not quite done yet. Mercury's still going forward. Mercury is moving forward until the middle of February. Although things are moving forward, when Mercury turns retrograde, it's going to go back over the same territory again, which may feel like those things which we thought were already done, those things which we thought we attended to, might still have loose ends that need to get tied up during the Mercury retrograde. And then it's not until Mercury turns direct and moves through that same area from around March 15th all the way through March 29th. That's kind of when this whole area of time is tied up. So February and March have this Mercury retrograde and Mercury in its shadow. And what that means is that communication will not be moving into it's moving into new territory now into the middle of March. But it's not done until the end of March and until planets are moving into Aries and we're moving forward again. So this is one of the strong themes of the month. And again, I've talked about this many times. I'll just state very briefly that in ancient astrology, traditional, classical, Hellenistic, medieval astrology, Vedic astrology, retrogrades get bad raps. They get bad raps because the planet is louder when it's closer to Earth. Planets turn retrograde when they get closer to Earth. We lose perspective. It looks like they're going backwards. And so if a planet is too loud, and we're living in a one-dimensional world where we're born into a place and that's where we live, the energy is loud, it has nowhere to go, and it either turns inward and therefore is suppressed or repressed. We deal with it as a projection, things are messed up. But we do not have to deal with Mercury retrograde that way. We need to be aware that there's more communication, more sense of urgency, more sense of things going on. It's like driving in rush hour. It's like the telephone lines and the electromagnetic spectrum is filled with information coming and going and coming and going. So signals can get crossed, things can get messed up, but we need to be very attentive to the increased level of communication, of information interchange, because we then can actually utilize this amplification of Mercury during this period of time, during February and into March, if we don't go crazy trying to think we need to resolve everything right now. That whole idea of don't sign a contract when Mercury is retrograde, don't travel when Mercury is retrograde, is just plain stupid. I mean, Mercury is retrograde, 3 times a year for 3 weeks. That's 2.25 months of Mercury retrograde. And it's not don't sign a contract. It's don't sign a contract unless you read it, unless you have your attorney read it, because it's the fine print. It's the things that you brush over. It's the directions you mishear. It's the decisions you make without logically thinking them through because you think it has to be done right now. Those are the things that'll get you with Mercury retrograde. So we begin the month talking about Mercury retrograde because even though it doesn't turn retrograde until the 16th, we're already feeling some of its energy as soon as it moves into Pisces on the 3rd. Now, the other thing is that Mercury then makes a sextile with Uranus. Mercury moving from now into Pisces. Uranus is at 2 Taurus. So when Mercury reaches 2 Pisces on the 4th, 5th, I'm going to take the aspects to the moon off just because that makes more noise than we need right now. So we can see here on February 5th that Mercury is making a sextile with Uranus. This is information coming out into the open. This is things being said that are genius, that are innovative, new ways of thinking about things that perhaps we hadn't thought about before. That's February 5th. By the 7th, Venus, which is here at the end of Pisces, Venus moves into Aries. We talked about that a little bit earlier. And in fact, Venus will catch up with Chiron, and this is a bit of an intense energy. We may focus on the negative side, the wounds, the feelings in the past where things didn't work. But remember, Chiron is also the mentor or the teacher, and as that Venus catches up with Chiron and conjoins it by the 9th and 10th, we're actually experiencing, on one hand, maybe some memories of things that didn't work out in the past, but we also maybe have plans of how to make it right, whether it's forgiving ourselves or forgiving others. Let's back up here just a little bit because we whizzed past the full moon. The full moon occurs at 11:33 p.m. That's Pacific time on February 8th. That means it occurs on February 9th at 2:33 a.m. on the East Coast of the United States, and adjust your time accordingly for Europe or anywhere else. This full moon, the full moon in Leo opposing the Sun in Aquarius, is not a very intense full moon. I mean, the full moon between the sun and Aquarius, the sun is in it as far away from its home sign Leo as it can get. The moon there maybe reinforces or reflects the position of its place in personal love, Leo, as opposed to collective love, Aquarius. Aquarius is about the collective, the group, it's about the future, and yet the moon in Leo is responding with the, here's my piece of creativity, here's what I love, here's how I love, here's how I'm going to say it now. And I think the most important thing about this full moon in Leo is that there are not a lot of other intense aspects happening at the same time. When we look at new moon and full moon charts, we look at what else is going on. What's going on is the fact that Venus has just moved into Aries and is approaching that conjunction with Chiron. That is significant. And what's going on is that the moon is coming into a trine with Mars, but that's a bit more balanced than it's been in a bit, because the moon Mars is actually a healthy expression of assertion boundaries. And so I think that that works in our favor. And there is also a building conjunction between Jupiter and Neptune, which is exact on the 20th. We'll have more to say about that in a moment. But I think the most important thing about this full moon is it's the culmination of personal needs and personal desires and how they are reflecting that of the larger group, culture, civilization, etc. It's what is my place in the role of where I stand in my community, in my group, in my ethnic community, in my national community, etc. And it's that balance between individual self and collective self. Okay, so we'll take the lines from the moon off again because they just make busyness because the moon moves so quickly. And when we're doing this month of a scan, we don't necessarily focus on the lunar aspects hour to hour. We try to focus on the things that matter a bit more. Now, so here we are on the 8th, and we're just coming out of this full moon. We do now have Mercury making this half square to Pluto, and then it will make a half square to Saturn. This becomes, on the 12th, this becomes a little bit of a theme of the month, because that when Mercury turns retrograde, Mercury will, after moving to 12 degrees and then turning retrograde on the 16th, Mercury will back into that half square with Saturn again, and then the half square with Pluto again. And then in March, it'll do it moving forward a third and final time. And so we get this dilemma of Mercury in Pisces, the person who doesn't tell the truth. Now remember, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, and I don't mean outright lying. I mean an artist and a poet and a visionary, someone who is sharing fantasies and sharing ideas on that level. This is Mercury in Pisces. Mercury in Pisces is filling in the gaps with the dreams and imagination and illusions. But as I've said many times before, William Blake wrote, imagine what is now proved was once only imagined. So Mercury has a job in Pisces, and that is to create the illusions that we then create the reality, the scaffolding upon which we build structure and reality. And so as Mercury moving direct first makes a half square with Pluto on the 9th, and then a half square, semi-square with Saturn on the 12th. This is like watching the illusions disintegrate, watching the illusions, watching the fantasies kind of melt down and deconstruct, and then the reality kind of rebuilt. Unfortunately, or I should say unfortunately, it's complicated because this is not the final scenario, because once Mercury turns retrograde and Mercury backs up through those same aspects, Mercury will back up through Saturn once it turns retrograde on February 19th, and then back up through that same semi-square to Pluto on the 23rd. And so it's almost like this whole process of what's real, what's not real, what's truth, what's fact, what's made up. We're not done with it. And it's going to plague us through February as we go back and forth with these revelations of what happened, again, whether we're talking about on a global, geological, civilization, cosmic, political, economic, climatological, personal, emotional. This occurs at every level. And so this is going to be a theme of the month of how communication isn't quite what it seems to be. This is fed by the fact that as we move that forward, Mercury's that semi-square first to Pluto, and then by the 12th, it makes it semi-square to Saturn. And by the 16th, this is where Mars moves from Sagittarius into Capricorn, boom, right there. And in fact, is followed just a couple days later by the moon moving into Capricorn. And this is a bit of a replay of a lot of the energy of the intensity of the Saturn-Pluto week, the, January, the eclipse January, let's say 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, that week. Because as the moon hits Mars, we have aggression again, we have assertion, we have the war machine cooking things up. And then over the days ahead, that moon will conjoin Jupiter and Pluto and Saturn. And so it almost is like an instant replay of that whole scenario. But something else is occurring in this period of time because now Mercury has turned retrograde. Let's back that up again to the 16th. There's Mercury right there stationed at 12 degrees of Pisces. And now Mercury turns retrograde. And once Mercury turns retrograde as station, it's making that half square to Saturn right at that point in time. So this is definitely a truth-telling time. Mars is moving into Capricorn, and remember, this is finishing up old business. And then we have the sun right in those days moving from Aquarius, boom, right there, into Pisces. And so we have this dance between the dreams and the illusion and the reality, and it's really hard to know what's true. But we have something else that kicks into motion here that I think becomes a theme for the year. And that is Jupiter, now moving through Capricorn, is making a sextile with Neptune in Pisces. Jupiter sextile Neptune, and this is something that occurs 3 times during the year because of the direct retrograde direct scenario. Jupiter makes that first sextile with Neptune on February 20th. There it is, exact, February 20th. It makes a retrograde sextile with Neptune on July 27th. And then the third and final time direct, when Jupiter moves direct, on October 12th. Now, Jupiter and Neptune have something in common, and they have something different. What they have in common is that they're both expansive. What they have different is Jupiter can only expand to the boundaries of Saturn. So Jupiter is a big idea, but you have to be rational about it. It's philosophy, it has to be logical, there has to be kind of extrapolation that builds on it, the ratio that is contained by Saturn. What they have in common is they're both expansive, but Jupiter can only blow up a balloon until Saturn, the boundaries are reached, and then it pops. Neptune, on the other hand, can go forever. Neptune is not just expansive, it's infinitely dispersive. It is the dreams and the imagination that do not have Saturn containing it. And when Jupiter and Neptune are sextile, there's opportunity that is created from Jupiter in Capricorn. This is Saturn's turf. Capricorn is Saturn's sign. And so Jupiter in Capricorn is giving us the ability to open our minds and grow, but Neptune is taking it to the farther reaches. And during this period of time with Mercury and the Sun in Pisces, it's a really interesting setup for what becomes a theme of the year, and that is the old ways are not doing the job. They're not containing reality. We have to grow. And this applies to everyone. I don't care whether you're a Trumper, a never Trumper, whether you're Republican or Democrat, whether you're New Age or Old Age. I don't care whether you're right-wing conservative, fundamentalist, or left-wing radical, crazy, futuristic or past. Everyone is affected by this this Jupiter-Neptune sextile this year. And we all have to take what we think we know and we have to begin expanding it. Because remember, Saturn and Jupiter are both moving toward a conjunction that occurs in December of 2020 in the sign of Aquarius. We get to leave, not we get to leave, we have to leave. We're forced to leave the stability and the structures of what was Capricorn for the land of what will be Aquarius. Okay, so the exact Jupiter sextile, Neptune is on February 20th, but it's in play all month. I mean, those planets stay within orb, within a few degrees, within a few degrees of each other. But something else is occurring right around this same period of time, and that is on February 21st. Here's Mars having moved into Capricorn, and Mars is closing in on a trine to Uranus, while the Sun is closing in on a sextile to Uranus and a sextile to Mars. As soon as Mars moves into Capricorn on the 16th, Mars is already picking up on that trine because Capricorn and Taurus are earth signs. Mars in Capricorn says, I'm going to do what I need to do to get the job done. I have the physical energy, I have the stamina, I have the endurance, I'm going to push, I'm going to make sure that I reach my goal. And Uranus is ingenious, it's electric, it's sudden, and when the two of those are working together, physical energy is powered by brilliance and innovation. Now, at the same time, we have the Sun, which moves into Pisces on the 18th, and then that Sun begins to pick up on the sextile by sign, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, that's a sextile, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, that's a sextile, and we can see that the Sun will make a sextile with both Mars on February 24th, and in fact, it'll make that sextile with Mars on the 24th, and it makes the sextile with Uranus first on the 22nd. So here's the Sun coming into the sextile with Uranus. Mars makes its trine to Uranus just the day before. Mars makes its trine to Uranus actually on the 21st. Let's back that up so we can see that. There's Mars's trine to Uranus, and there's the Sun's sextile to Uranus. But the Sun and Mars are kind of moving almost at the same speed. And so the Sun doesn't actually sextile Mars until the 5-degree point, and that is on the 24th. This whole period of time, though, we also have Mercury retrograding back into this mess. Mercury retrograding back into first the sextile to Uranus, and that Mercury sextile Uranus and a sextile to Mars. Mercury sextiles Mars on the 26th, and then it sextiles Uranus right there on the 28th of February. So we're getting a real solid play from this communication now. We're communicating about things we've already communicated, we've already seen, we've already done. But it's very interesting because now we get kind of things breaking into the open on another layer. So let's move back. Now we have all the aspects drawn in again. Let's move back to February 20th, February 21st, where we actually have the Mars trining Uranus, the Jupiter sextiling Neptune. This is the 20th and the 21st. We do have the Sun making a half square with Jupiter, the Sun making a half square with Jupiter from 3 Pisces to 18 Capricorn. Again, we can exaggerate, we can be overconfident, but the Sun is making that sextile with Uranus. I think these are positive days, and they lead into an incredibly powerful, and I actually think a positive new moon that is at 7:31 a.m. on February 23rd. This new moon, it occurs at 4 degrees, 29 minutes. The actual new moon is probably just maybe a few seconds after this. If we moved it ahead just a minute, they would both be at 4:29, 4 Pisces, 29 minutes. But this new moon is, if the full moon in Leo back on February 8th was not an incredibly powerful full moon, this is an incredibly powerful new moon. Why? Because this new moon on February 23rd it's just incredibly aspected every which way. I mean, we have this new moon forming that sextile with Mars, the moon comes right through that. The Sun is, right there also. And this is incredibly potent. The Sun's sextile is not until 6 p.m. on the 24th, but it's like within a few minutes of arc. On top of that, Venus is making a square to Jupiter. This is indulgence, overindulgence. It's like someone put too many spoonfuls of sugar in the coffee. Maybe someone spent too much money and got caught. There's something here about money and about overdoing it. On top of that, we also have Mercury making that half square, retrograde Mercury making the half square with Pluto that we talked about earlier, because Mercury is backing through the half square both with Saturn and with Pluto. And this is like deep information coming out into the open. And then Mercury will make a sextile with Mars. And all of this is incredibly potent energy. That sextile to Mars is on the 25th. We can move this ahead now past the new moon. But we have the Pisces cluster here of the Sun, Mercury, and the moon. In fact, the Sun lines up with Mercury just after Mercury retrogrades back over the Sun. That's on the Sun lines up with Mercury. That's on the 25th. There we go, right there. Mercury retrogrades back over the Sun. The Mercury is sextiling Mars. It's making a half square with Venus. This is a lot of action. But the important thing now about this is that this action is all high frequency. It's like the difference between a chronic illness and an acute illness. Now, an acute illness can be tied to something more chronic, but the acute thing is things are hot and heavy right in the moment. And these are Mercury, Venus, and Mars is what's going on. Even, Venus and Jupiter. But we're not talking about Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto making aspects with one another. Although let's not forget that Saturn-Pluto is still within just 3 degrees of orb, even though that's beginning to dim. It's like the major events are in the past, but now we're replaying them, and they're creating fevers, and they're creating outbreaks, and they're creating energy that's in the moment. By the 26th, Mercury makes a half square with Venus. Communication, things are not okay. There's arguments, there's stuff going on. By the 28th, by the last day of the month, the Sun is making that half square with Pluto. Remember, the Sun made a half square with Jupiter back on February 21st, makes a half square with Pluto. And the half square with Pluto is on February 28th. And I think that this is another round of deep, intense remaking, it's reinforming the energy. And that is on February 28th. Oh, and it doesn't make the half square, the Sun doesn't make the half square to Saturn until early next month, but that'll be the finishing touches on this round of energy. Meanwhile, on the last day of the month, Venus makes a square to Pluto, and this Venus in Aries, remember Venus has been in Aries all this time now. She's a little bit hot under the collar. She knows what she wants. She's going to get it. And when she made that square to Jupiter, Venus made the square to Jupiter back on February 23rd. We may have overdone it. She may have overdone it. We may have been swept up in something that was a bit too much. Now, when Venus makes the square to Pluto on February 28th, there is a price to pay. We're going deep, but stuff is coming out, and it can be vulnerable and it can be very important, but its secret stuff is coming out. And it won't be until Venus makes that square to Saturn in March that we get a little bit of finality around this. Also, this month ends with a bang because Mercury moving retrograde has made the half squares to Saturn, Pluto, and to Jupiter. On the 28th, Mercury makes that half square to Jupiter, and it also makes a sextile to Uranus. So once again, we're getting communication. We're getting things blown out into the open. And I don't think there'll be new things here. I think the things that'll come out will just be deeper and more on the same things that we've already seen. And it won't be until Mercury turns direct. Mercury turns direct on March 9th. And then as it moves through all this material again, then I think we'll begin to see how all this sets into place. I'm sure that a lot of this is in and around the impeachment, however this unfolds. I'm an astrologer, not a prophet. I do not know what will happen from this. I know that things are crazier than they seem on the surface, and they seem pretty crazy on the surface. But things will continue to unfold, and I'll see you all mid-month, or I'll see those of you who are on the Patreon $3 a month. I'll see you mid-month with a mid-month update, and we'll kind of play this on through the end of the month based upon what we know by then. And then in March, as we move from the Pisces into Aries, we'll see this moving into even newer and unexplored territory. So that's it. It's an interesting month. There's a lot going on, but a lot of what's going on is hot and heavy and fast rather than deep and long lasting. But we have the deep and long lasting stuff from last month that's going to last long enough that it's with us still now and for the months ahead. So as we move through this crazy time, you know my drill. It's think cosmically. Expand those thoughts to the outward limits as greatly as you can, but expanding the mind does no use at all unless you apply it in your everyday life. Think cosmically, act locally. I'm Rick Levine. See you next month.